Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Energy Buyers Brief. Really excited for you to join us. Everyone in chat listening, thank you very much for spending part of your afternoon, probably afternoon. I guess if we have any far west Alaska, Hawaii folks, it's morning. But we appreciate you spending some time with us. Quick logistics, there is a chat feature. You're welcome to interact with that and let us know anything you'd like, questions you have, we'll answer them live. We're going to talk a fair amount about Texas today and ERCOT, but some of that stuff is applicable to other markets as well. And in honor of that, if you have any Texas-y things you've done, favorite barbecue, last time you saw the Astros lose to your home team, feel free to put those in chat. My name is Ben Walker. I'm the VP of Analytics here at Environ, which means I look at regulatory changes, market pricing trends, and market fundamentals for natural gas and electricity across the U.S. I'm joined by JB Swerda, who has closing in on a couple decades of experience as an industry veteran here on both the supplier and consultant side, helping clients build strategic procurement portfolios. He's got a good golf game, a better head on his shoulders, and he's coming off a trip to Cooperstown with his Little League team and shepherding kids through that environment. So JB, thanks for taking time out of your summer to hang out with us.
Yeah, of course, Ben. I wish that golf game were true. I wish it were a little better.
I came from baseball. I can't swing a golf club. My slice is just horrendous. It's how it goes.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So we're going to get started with looking at the interconnection queue for ERCOT. So that image will be on the screen here briefly. But to introduce to folks what an interconnection queue is, on both the generation side and the load side, you have to request permission to join the grid. We don't want to add a huge 1 megawatt manufacturing plant or a huge 10 megawatt gas plant or whatever it is that would cause the grid problems when it tried to connect. Power can, whether it's pushing power into the grid or taking it off, we want to make sure the systems are available. And so when you want to join, you request through what's called the interconnection process. And the interconnection queue in Texas has exploded over the last couple of years. So on the left, you see the existing peak demand in ERCOT is about 85 gigawatts or 85,000 megawatts. And you have nearly 430,000 of new load that's wanting to join. So you've got that, existing to new, of which 90% of that load is data centers. And then on the generation side, you have just a hair under 200,000 megawatts of existing generation and a whole bunch of generation looking to come online too. So JB, this is kind of the environment we find ourselves in. We're talking about from an energy buyer's perspective, what jumps out to you from this kind of a look at the change of pace that might be coming to Texas?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that stands out is, this data center growth. Is it real or is it speculative? And then how is there going to be enough power to fuel that data center growth if it is real? And so, it's the ultimate chicken or the egg scenario right now that we're dealing with, that the utilities are trying to balance, that ERCOT's trying to balance, traders are trying to kind of figure out. And so, for me, having been in this for 20 years or so now, never seen anything like it, probably will not see anything like it, at least for the rest of my career. And so it's really trying to target, all right, what's real and what's not. And the biggest thing that stood out to me was Encore, most recently, in their annual report. They started receiving, or they shared in their report how much money was actually being put down as deposits for these interconnections. And it was the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars that people are already putting down to call it reserve their capacity on the system. And so is it to the tune of, you've got over 500 gigs that could potentially be in the queue? Yeah, certainly not. But the the kind of the hurdles that some of these utilities have put in place, they've really put pressure on the requesters of this load, and so it is becoming more and more real by the day. So as long as ERCOT is, they're publishing a chart like this, they're going on the most up-to-date data. So you have to really take them for what it is, and that's legitimate interconnection requests that are moving through the system. And now, are some of these dollar figures, are they call it options, so that they can kick the can down the road to some degree? Perhaps. But the question is, how do you solve for this? And that's the $1 million question.
I think you're raising a really good point about the kind of money down payment to keep your spot in line. So for listeners listening, JB started by saying, how likely do we think the AI data center race is here? Tell us in chat if you've got thoughts on that. But the concern always has been how much of these new generation, these new load, how much of that is speculative, right? And how much of it is a data center maybe saying, I'm going to input one bid in Texas, one bid in Illinois, one bid in Ohio, and then I'll figure it out later. And so as a response, the grid has started increasing the amount of down payment money, the analysis that they run to evaluate that. They're asking for more and more earnest money from data centers. And when you see that amount of money being plopped down, there's got to be some intent behind it. I don't know if we're going to get to 500 gigs. Is 200 gig reasonable, right? And it's more of a question of timeline to me.
Oh, no, without a doubt. And just to put things into perspective for those on the call, 5 years ago, you could submit a piece of paper, one-page piece of paper to Encore and request 50 megawatts of power. And they would do their studies, and they would bring you back a timeline and a cost to call it do business. Well, insert the crypto boom, a handful of years back. And that's what people were doing. They were doing that. They were identifying substations and just requesting as much capacity as they could, with little pushback from the utilities. They were required to go through this process. But what happened in a relatively short amount of time from a utility perspective, is that they started putting up barriers one by one. Okay, now you need a larger form, and you need more details from a stamped engineer. And they kept trying to implement these different levels of, call it a barrier to entry, making it more difficult, to the point where now people are, you want your request in, you are going to have to pay for it. And just one more thing, it can happen so quickly as to a customer of mine requested 60 megawatts. We sat on the document for a few months, and at that point where it was 60 megawatts, we were supposed to get that in early 2028, and a $2 million, call it down payment, reservation fee, whatever you want to call it. 3 months later, it turned into $7.5 million and pushed to basically the start of 2030, right? This is just all in a matter of just a few months. And so that's how quickly things are changing. And again, that barrier to entry keeps getting more and more material.
Yeah, you kind of alluded to this. This is kind of the defining few years of kind of this generation of I think industry veterans, right? Like anybody who's been in the industry, who's in the industry now, will talk about this in 15 years, right? Or even 25 years. Like this is kind of the big change that's happening to the grid. We talked about this a couple energy briefs previously, but the energy markets were really built when load was flat. We had 20-ish years where the grid, for the most part, ERCOT grew a little bit, but for the most part, energy load was pretty flat for the last 20 years. And now we're looking at these steep up and to the right demand growth curves that markets just haven't really had to adapt to before. I think they can and they will, but it's kind of a question of, I think there's a tug and a kind of a tug of war between the price side, right? As what is the future price going to do, and then the regulatory side, right? How much are we going to kind of pull back? To your point, you want to connect now, but you're not going to connect until 2030. Do you see a similar price regulatory thing, or is there a different view?
Oh, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, there's in my opinion, right? Over the next, call it 3 years, you don't know which one of these is going to necessarily win out. And do you want to gamble on being on the other side? Will the demand show up and you don't have the load? Or are you betting the opposite, where the load's going to show up and the demand doesn't? And so that would have a bearish signal on price. Now, for me, I want to look at things, how it would fit my business right now. And the most volatile period, in my opinion, the most unpredictable black box period, is over the next 3 years. And if you and that could drag into maybe 2030. But throughout this period, you're either gambling on the left or you're gambling on the right. And on my screen, it's the requested load versus the generation showing up. And so, you really want to be mindful of where you are right now, from a budget standpoint, and if it fits well for you now, if pricing comes back and you may be saving a couple dollars a megawatt hour, and that effect on your budget is beneficial, I might take that. I would recommend taking that risk off the table, and because of the unknowns that are just obviously apparent when you look at this graph. And everyone's different too, right? If I'm a steady manufacturing load and I'm unable to shift operations, or if I don't have some sort of backup generation, battery, et cetera, where I can't take advantage of kind of again shifting my demand curve at my facility, then I might just want to take that risk off the table. And then that if I'm a consumer that can pull on backup power generation asset, CHP, et cetera, maybe I have a solar shape that I could add to my open position, you name it. That's where the conversation may differ a little bit. And so sorry if I dovetailed into maybe a different.
No. This is great. I think I've heard you say take the risk off the table and let the dust settle. Right? It's just that cloud of uncertainty that kind of everybody's trying to stare at. I see Paul in the chat kind of gambling on the left side, saying AI has picked up and he doesn't see it slowing down. So that might be confidence on the load. Real quick on the generation side, one thing that jumps out to me from that, I know we've talked about gas turbines. It's really hard to get new gas turbines. Just like we talked about, data centers are 4 or 5 years out to get power. If you want to build a gas plant, you're 4 or 5 years out probably to get a turbine to you as well. One thing that jumps out to me on this stack on the right is actually the size of batteries. I didn't realize before digging into this data just how much battery storage is going to come to the Texas grid. And I got to think that at least some of that is just to try to level out some of the solar. Any comments on, what are you looking at with the right side stack there of, if I'm a buyer and I'm looking at, is this a shift in generation that I should be concerned about and changing my strategy around?
Oh, I don't know if it's necessarily changing your strategy around. Certainly with respect to the storage generation coming online. I think the more we've been involved on consulting on the storage side for a few years now, and quite frankly, storage hasn't it hasn't been economic. Like, so for the folks that are focusing on storage, if they're battery operator, or if they're focused strictly on storage, I can tell you their returns haven't been great. They want volatility, they want high prices, and it hasn't quite translated here. Certainly in most recently winter, and then certainly this summer. So I'm curious. I'm less optimistic that those storage assets in that queue actually show up than I am, maybe the wind and certainly the solar. If I'm a buyer, I want that solar to show up and continue to put pressure, downward pressure on the super peak times where I may not be able to shift my load in time or at all, and thus lowering my exposure to the general market during that time.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing behind the meter solar in New York lower the kind of change the demand profile, right? Lower the midday profile. In Texas, it's even more so, and in California, it's even more than that. So it's interesting to see that pace of change kind of around the U.S.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if I read it. Maybe I heard it. Maybe I heard it from you, Ben, because you're a pretty smart fella. But Texas just recently, had lower pricing during the daytime than it did during the during nighttime hours, right? So, you can go into. There's a number of reasons, or what time of day, where they took that intel from.
Yeah.
But the point is, these renewables, they've been doing their jobs, right? And I think they've been doing their job to the point where that you might see that translate into natural gas as well. Because, if you think about that stat alone, right, and thinking about ERCOT, Texas, renewables are having an impact on power pricing. Power prices aren't to the point during the day that they have been in years leading up. Well, that has to there's quite a bit of natural gas generation in ERCOT, and so wondering if that has a more bearish kind of signal to natural gas as well. You're just not needing, the renewables are absorbing a lot of that pressure that was on natural gas generation for those super peak times, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And I've seen some things that, wind out of West Texas was cost competitive at like negative $17 a megawatt hour, right? Because of the performance tax credit that they were able to get. Anytime they were generating power, they were generating kind of a separate revenue stream. And, it's definitely, I think the grid mix to me is changing my decisions. To your point about nighttime and daytime prices in Texas, if you look 2-3 years out, we are starting to see the forwards flip, by which I mean daytime, you're still a couple years away from this, but you are starting to see the daytime prices trade below the nighttime prices, which is kind of a weird framework. But we saw it in California, and Texas is just kind of a few years behind that. I want to acknowledge the question that Chris, or the comment that Chris made, Christopher, here in the chat, to just say, here in Massachusetts, batteries are incredibly beneficial. I do think batteries have kind of 2 or 3 different uses, right? There was one group I knew going up into New England, and their whole storage strategy was just capacity. They were just selling capacity, and they thought they could make it work. This is going back 5 or 6 years. I know as a company, they're still around. So I think they did. But that's different than somebody who's maybe arbitraging some of the discharge and discharge cycles. And that's different than maybe somebody who's providing resiliency benefits around grid and voltage and frequency regulation, or somebody who's using it on campus for demand response. Which actually leads me to Will's question. And he's asking about regulatory items with PUC and ERCOT about LCLs being large computational loads. So that's another acronym for data centers, and how that might change some demand response programs. So I saw recently, and this was, I want to say Monday, JB, where the ERCOT grid is basically telling data centers, look, you either need to say how much load you want, and or you either need to take firm load, you need to be curtailed by us, or you need to bring your own generation. And they're kind of like forcing them to choose into that market. So I think that might be what Will's referring to. We are seeing some conversation around DR changes in ERCOT, but I don't think we're far enough along to really opine on what the future of that looks like. I don't know if you've got any thoughts there, JB.
Yeah, look, DR and ERCOT hasn't been especially lucrative over the past few years, and so I guess my point to that is that if you're counting on demand response revenue as a lot of people did, right, especially a handful of years ago, you would consider that demand response revenue offsetting some of your costs, your exposure. You build that into your models of if you're on a real-time product, for example, and the juice, if you call it, hasn't really been worth the squeeze with your traditional DR programs. ERS, for example. There are some others that could be quite that are more lucrative, more attractive. That's also a very subset of customers that could be capable of participating in some of those frequency responses in different programs.
Yeah, all good stuff. Just if you're listening in from elsewhere, if you're looking at demand response, New England is currently reevaluating their entire capacity market, kind of 2028 timeframe, moving to a seasonal and a monthly approach. So if you're looking at any sort of an asset, you've got kind of a 2-year known window, and then you hit uncertainty pretty fast. PJM's had a huge capacity prices. We actually are expecting the PJM capacity auction results in 10 minutes. So as soon as this call is over, I'm going to start going refreshing that page. But very, very high capacity costs in PJM, which are changing the demand response game. And in Texas and PJM, we're seeing them pass regulations around data centers, essentially requiring some sort of a participation, right? The grid knows that, again, just looking at the scale of the problem on the screen here, there's some big changes coming, and they want to maintain the tools in their toolbox. So whether it's kind of an economic dispatch that the data centers do, or whether it's some sort of a regulatory, more of a stick than a carrot, I think we're definitely going to see some requirements and participation of data centers to turn down the load. This has been great. I want to move us on, JB, because I want to get your thoughts on oil inventories, right? So natural gas supply, we've seen with the kind of inventories have been built up for a while. We saw inventories fall down in 2022, a little bit of build back, and then Iran dropped us down. We're at strategic petroleum reserves that are 40-year lows. That to me has impacts on natural gas supply. What do you think as a buyer, JB?
Yeah, I think you're seeing it. Quite frankly, I think you're seeing it now. If hopefully you've received alerts that pricing has come down 2026, 2027 strip from certainly a gas position translates quite a bit into electricity, but for retail gas, this is as low as you've seen in a handful of years. And from an electricity perspective, the drop over the past few weeks has put pricing levels, and depending on where you are in the country, but has put pricing levels in a very attractive spot that we haven't seen in a while. And so I think the associated gas is very real, right? That you're going to see. So associated gas, when oil drillers, instead of they have gas when they start drilling for oil, they have to do something with it. They used to be able to flare it, and now for the most part they can market it, they can sell it, they can put it in pipe and get it to market. And so that is a byproduct of drilling for oil and trying to catch up with the lack of reserves here recently. And so I think you're seeing that excess now, and that is largely coming from the Permian basin. And so,
yeah. And there's a lot of pipelines trying to get that gas and oil out. right, to market. And so I think, like everything, timing is going to be a big important issue on that.
Oh yeah, no, without a doubt. We were fortunate enough to work with a large pipeline that was bringing excess gas down to Corpus Christi, and so yeah, it's and there's only more to come, right? And again, the Permian, from a gas perspective, is the wild card across the country, because that is crude, and they are just sending along as many molecules as they can from the gas side. Now you've got the Appalachian, you have Haynesville, that they need to see pricing a little bit higher, but from Permian, it's a byproduct.
Yeah. So just to summarize for buyers, right? We're expecting some strong gas supply in the coming call it 12 to 18 months, until things change. Let's talk about weather a little bit. El Nino's started. I think we might get a weather map on the screen here, but how has that treated you from an energy pricing standpoint, JB?
Yeah, again, a little bit of a perfect storm with, price of natural gas coming off, and really it's been a more mild summer, specifically in Texas, than we're used to. I know if you look on a day-to-day average, it might not show it, but it has been, and it's followed this quite well. It has been extremely wet. I'm based in Houston. I can't remember a spring, early summer that was as wet as it is now. And so again, you're not seeing those high prices, and you're seeing that translate into the forward curves as well. But what's going to be really exciting is This is to see what's in store for this winter, and with the Super El Nino, expecting a warmer than normal winter.
I wanted to pull this up here because I wanted to just touch on the differences by region, right? So we all know that there's a big heat wave early July. PJM set a new record demand level, which had toppled a 20-year-old record, and ERCOT didn't even come close, right? ERCOT was just kind of humming along just normal. And so we are expecting generally higher temps across the U.S. That can be bullish for summer prices, but maybe bearish for winter, right? New England natural gas, maybe we haven't seen it yet in the forward curves, but maybe we start to see some price relief if we get some kind of warmer temperatures up there. So certainly something to watch. I know we're close to time here, so I know we ran out of time to go through all of our topics, which is great. I enjoyed the conversation. I'll give you a last word, JB. Anything, if you're an energy buyer, you're in Texas or anywhere in the country, if you want to go somewhere else, do you have that simple message of, give me a sentence?
Look, I think volatility is the name of the game over the next few years. And, if you can I would take advantage of the pricing that we're seeing now and secure you call it next 3 years, because volatility is going to win out, and it's going to reverse itself, whether it's natural gas markets or electricity markets. People aren't just going to keep drilling. They will eventually, it will correct itself. But I think we are truly in a sweet spot right now. And you don't want to be caught on the wrong side of that volatility. So.
I love it. Thank you. I think I would say I loved your analogy of, you're either gambling on load coming or generation coming. And that's what we don't know. It's going to be a race between those two. And which one wins out will have a significant impact on pricing. Yeah. If you got an opportunity now, though, take a look.
I would definitely be taking a look right now, for sure.
Cool. Thank you, JB. Appreciate you joining us. And to everyone who's listening in in the peanut gallery there, in the chat and the comment sections, thank you for participating. And we'll hopefully see you again next time we do this in about a month.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.